We evaluated goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback to increase the daily step count of 5 healthy adult females. The process of this study was based on the article Using Goal Setting and Feedback to Increase Weekly Running Distance by Wack, Crossland, and Miltenberger in 2014. The participants of this study set one long-term goal and short-term weekly goals based on data taken during the baseline portion of the study. Results demonstrated that 4 out of 5 participants increased their daily step count. An increase in physical activity has been found to improve mental well-being. Although the universal number of recommended steps per day is 10,000, Tudor, Locke, and Bassett recommends that improvements to increasing daily step counts should be based on baseline values, with less than 5,000 steps considered a sedentary lifestyle index, 5,000 to 7,900 steps considered low active, 7,500 to 9,999 steps considered somewhat active, 10,000 to 12,000 steps considered active, and greater than 12,500 steps to be considered highly active. Although there is a clear knowledge and understanding that exercise will increase health, it is difficult to increase motivation for specifically the sedentary to increase movement. Therefore, the recognition is not enough to make behavior changes. Goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback are successful interventions in increasing an individual's daily step count.
Goal setting is most effective when it's something important to the individual, when the goal is realistic, and when the progress can be seen, and when feedback is provided. When an individual sets a clearly stated and attainable goal, they're most likely to meet the goal. One method that's been researched is using step counting devices to collect a baseline of daily steps, then to set a goal to increase daily step counting. Mobile device tools and social software can help with managing health and wellness. Wristband pedometers come with an application for an electronic device that will allow a person to set a goal. The device will then record the data on the application and show if the goal for that day was met. In sedentary occupations, the use of a pedometer can help to increase physical activity. When looking at goal setting within research, emphasis can be placed on the type of goal. Research also shows that goal conceptualization or appraisal may be critical for understanding motivational consequences of goal pursuit. Davis and others, from an article written in 2015, examined the results of a study that looked at academic goal setting and high-level and low-level motivational aspects of the goal. During the experiment, focus was placed on the superordinate reasons for pursuing a goal. Questions about why the task was performed were answered, as well as how the task is to be performed. Participants were asked to write about either the academic goal to get a good grade in one of their classes, or the non-specific goal of a goal you want to accomplish within the next week. Results were determined using chi-squared tests, which confirmed that there was a moderate correlation among the dependent variables, with goal meaningfulness being positively associated with goal motivation and self-concordance. Goal motivation was also positively correlated to self-concordance. When looking at the meaningfulness of the goal, there was a main effect of construal, such that participants who wrote about why they pursue the goal reported that the goal was more meaningful than those who wrote about how they pursue the goal. Motivation to pursue the goal showed no main effect of construal or goal domain on goal motivation. Goal self-concordance showed that those who wrote about why they pursue a goal reported greater self-concordance relative to those who write about how they pursue it. By setting a goal that has significant importance to an individual and making the goal attainable, an individual is more likely to put in the effort needed to meet a goal, such as increasing daily step count, increasing positive study habits, or reducing calorie intake.
When combined with goal setting, self-monitoring has been shown to be an effective component of interventions to promote physical activity. Self-monitoring systems like Fitbit tracks movement in a way of performance evaluation, badge earnings, and timesheets. This is also during leisure time, therefore using the same type of evaluation for the person in their leisure time as they experience at their place of employment. By being able to monitor a goal daily or throughout the day, it increases the likelihood of a person being more conscious of their goal and how close they are to meeting a goal. A study conducted by Carls and others in 2005 experimented with interventions that targeted self-monitoring as a way to increase the results of participants participating in a behavioral weight loss program. Within the study, participants were assessed, then participated in intervention for 6 months. The group with greater self-monitoring of exercise was significantly associated with fewer difficulties with exercise, higher levels of weekly exercise, and greater weight loss. The participants with consistent self-monitoring of exercise lost approximately twice as much weight, exercised nearly twice as long each week, and reported fewer difficulties with exercise than inconsistent self-monitors. Self-monitoring has benefits for other behaviors as well. Self-monitoring was found to increase overall classroom study behavior. Sagotsky, Patterson, and Lepper in 1978 conducted research on self-monitoring and goal setting with students participating in a mathematics program. Self-monitoring was found to increase overall classroom study behavior. However, goal setting was not. Interestingly, those who were in the goal setting condition were more likely to fail to utilize the procedure provided, whereas the self-monitoring were more likely to succeed. Evidence supporting self-monitoring suggested that it is a critical component of reaching goals set by individuals and groups.
Feedback is an important part of increasing a behavior. When setting and monitoring goals, receiving feedback can increase the likelihood that a person will stay motivated to continue working towards their goals. By sharing results with other individuals and receiving feedback, it can hold a participant accountable for meeting their goal as well as giving them encouragement. Sharing physical activity, including step counting, helps individuals reach their goal by motivating people using social support and social pressure. Musson and Constable 2012 created goalposts and goal line to track increased physical activity. Both iOS applications use weekly goal setting, journaling, rewards, and reviewing data. But goalposts use sharing the participants' results with others using Facebook newsfeed. Goal line did not use sharing. 19 participants were used in both groups, and each reported that setting a goal helped motivate them to increase their physical activity. The participants of goalposts stated that sharing the information on Facebook was uncomfortable, but sharing the information with people did help them feel more accountable. Feedback is one of the most powerful influences in achieving and learning, but can be a negative or positive influence depending on the way it is delivered. Haiti and Temporally 2007 poses the feedback model with 3 specific questions. Where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? To clarify the discrepancy between what is understood and what is trying to be understood when providing feedback from teachers, coaches, and experienced persons. When providing feedback based on increasing daily physical activity, a person must examine where the participant is now, where they would like to or need to be, and how they are going to get there. Some physical activity trackers, such as Fitbit and Runkeeper, can provide support and words of encouragement to the runner while they are out running their course, no matter where they are, due to smartphone applications. This allows another aspect of reflections, encouragements, and supports, said Barbozone, 2015. Feedback can influence the person receiving the feedback in a positive or negative way. It can deter a person who is trying to reach a goal or learning a new task if not delivered in a clear and positive way. When giving feedback, it is key to understand that the words and tone used are influencing another person's activity and decisions. It is important for the person receiving feedback is open to the feedback given. Feedback has been used in numerous settings and situations for many years to help shape and change behaviors and performances of individuals.
Goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback have the ability to increase positive behaviors and decrease negative behaviors. The key in goal setting for any situation is to set reachable goals that can be obtained. After setting a goal, self-monitoring will increase the likelihood that the goal will be reached. Feedback can help motivate a person to continue working toward meeting the goal or providing advice for making changes necessary to reach the set goal. These 3 steps can help with individuals who would like to increase physical activity by increasing daily step counts. Using pedometers with applications for electronic devices can help an individual with goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback from other participants.
Okay, so with that being said, we attempted to replicate a study that actually looked at running distance and how to increase the weekly running distance for the participants. Obviously, we made slight changes because we're about to talk about pedometers. So we modified it just a little bit in order to allow for normal people to be doing it. Instead of doing running, we did walking. So each group member actually acquired some sort of step counting device, whether it was just something you wore on your wrist that would count it directly on it, or if it was something that actually put it to an application on your phone. Either way, it was supposed to be some sort of pedometer, not necessarily identical, but something that we could use fairly easily and wasn't overly expensive. Because of the fact that this study obviously was done at a shorter period of time due to obviously the class, we shortened the original study to about 4 weeks-ish to allow for at least some level of baseline intervention and get some data worth on that, but not, you know. All right, so in the participants, we have 5 women. Obviously, as you can see in the actual presentation, there are 5 of us, and we happen to be female. We're all working towards our masters, as is clear. For this particular thing, we did for class, and as stated, we were replicating an actual article that used running instead of walking. Primarily, we used goal setting and feedback, but we also used self-monitoring as well. But the biggest part, as you'll see in the graphs later on, was that we actually had a goal, and we used that the self-monitoring aspect as a feedback to what we were doing, if that makes any sense. All right, we all live in different states and time zones. It's something to consider. So there's going to be some modification to that, particularly since the way in which we did it is going to be slightly different. It still ends up being the same, but yeah. So for this, we did a multiple baseline design, which if you're not aware of a multiple baseline design, it's really where you have each person's going to start on a different day. So you have, say, the first person is going to start doing their baseline study on, say, on Monday, and then once they hit stability, say on, I don't know, Thursday, then they're going to go ahead and go into intervention. The second person might start doing their baseline on Monday or Tuesday, and then they might actually hit intervention, say, on Friday or Saturday. So the point of it is that there's sort of this overlap that's going on. Once we hit a stable baseline, as is expected, we move on to an intervention phase, obviously trying to keep within that multiple baseline criteria. Materials, as I said, are pedometers of some kind, whether it is something that has an app or doesn't. They're not identical. We all had different devices that to use based on your monetary needs or something like that, whether you liked it or didn't like it, that sort of reason. Whether or not they provide accurate count of steps is one that is questionable, but we can talk about that at a later time. So with that being said, The way that we actually defined the use of the pedometers is that to count a step, it was any movement that actually activates the step counter made from the person stepping out of bed all throughout the day until they went to bed. So if you attach it to your cat and they ran around the house with it, that obviously doesn't count. But if you put it on and you walk to the kitchen or to the bathroom, technically you are stepping, therefore it counts.
So now we're going to discuss baseline. So we did, as mentioned before, a multiple baseline, which is we all started collecting data on the same day. And when the first participant received a stable baseline, they started intervention. And then the next person would start intervention when their baseline was stable. And so this is considered a multiple baseline design, and every person started intervention on a different day.
Okay, so for the intervention, which obviously followed the baseline, we individually determined a long-term goal for the entire intervention, so a distance that we wanted to meet each day by the end. And then we also began with our first short-term goal to indicate how many steps we were going to take over the next week. So the day each participant sets their goal will be different because we all started baseline, or we all started intervention on different days. So some of us went Monday through Friday with intervention. Some of us went Tuesday through Monday because we did not count the weekends in our intervention. So as we went through the week, we needed to collect data 4 out of the 5 days of the week at least, hopefully 5 out of 5. And then we wanted to meet criteria, which we set for ourselves 3 out of the 5 days. If we met criteria, we were then able to increase our goal for the next week in intervention. And if we did not meet criterion, then we had the option to either keep the goal the same if we felt that we were close, or lower the goal for the following week. And then this continued through, I think most of us got 4 weeks. I think a couple of us got 5. So that continued through the end of the intervention. And Sarah, if you want to go ahead and cover Iowa.
Yes.
That's okay.
Sorry. For inter-observer agreement, each participant met at least once weekly with another participant to verify the data collection met the criterion. Since the members of the group live in different states and it would not be possible to spend a day together collecting data for each person's total number of steps, the participants shared data via Google Hangouts, Google Docs, and/or text messaging to show total number of steps. The data was shared by showing the IOA partner the steps that recorded using the app for their specific wristbands and expressing their activities for the day. For treatment fidelity, that shows the accuracy and consistency of an intervention to ensure that it is being implemented as it was written, and that each participant conducts the research in the same comparable manner. For the intervention, each participant met as a group via video call and discussed the procedural protocol. Each participant read and understood the baseline and intervention prior to beginning treatment. The operational definition of the behavior being measured was written and read by all participants. 4 of the 5 participants showed an increase in steps daily and had an increasing trend during the intervention phase on the graph, which demonstrates interval validity. With our research group, we also demonstrated external validity within the research design by showing the increasing goals of generalizing across 4 out of 5 participants.
So for our results, as Sarah just said, 4 out of 5 of our participants increased their step count frequency averages with goal setting. So for my step count, I increased from a mean of 7,942 steps in baseline to 9,864 steps in intervention. Alicia's step count increased from a mean of 6,427 steps in baseline to a mean of 8,595 steps in intervention. Sarah's step count increased from 9,449 steps in baseline to a mean of 10,677 steps in intervention. Robin's step count decreased from 13,034 steps in baseline to 12,245 steps in intervention. Amanda's step count increased from 5,438 steps in baseline to 8,525 steps in intervention. I ended up achieving my weekly goal for 5 out of the 5 weeks. Alicia achieved her weekly goal for 3 out of the 5 weeks. Sarah achieved her weekly goal for 4 out of 4 weeks. Robin achieved her weekly goal for 3 out of 4 weeks. And Amanda achieved her weekly goal for 4 out of 4 weeks. So in the graph section, we used a multiple baseline design for this intervention, and each participant will be presenting their graph in the order that they started the intervention. I was the first group member to start the intervention, and I did my baseline for 5 days and then started the intervention. So I'll pull my graph up real quick. So during the baseline, I averaged about 7,941 steps, and my baseline was the most stable out of the group, so I began intervention the following workday. I set my long-term goal at 10,000 steps and my first short-term goal at 9,000. I met this goal for 4 out of 5 days and then increased 500 to 9,500. I met this goal for 4 out of 5 days and then increased to 10,000. I met this one for 4 out of 5 days and then went to 10,500. And I met this goal for 3 out of 5 days, so my final goal was set at 11,000. And I met this goal for 4 out of 5 days. I have a half work day every Friday and complete most of my homework during this afternoon. So I sit a lot, and I think that's what most of the dips are from those Fridays. But even though I surpassed my 10,000 step goal in week 3, I decided to continue increasing my steps by the same amount each week. My graph has a positive trend and continues to increase each week. I think that if the intervention would have continued, I would have remained stable at around 11,000. During the last week, I found myself having to pace around to get the last 500 to 1,000 steps. But overall, having goals to meet every day increased my daily step taking, and the next group member to start the intervention was Alicia.
All right, so let me get my graph up here. Okay, so here's my graph. I started baseline, and in baseline, my average step per day was 6,427. So for week 1 goal, I set it at 7,500, which I met 4 out of 5 days. I increased my week goal to 8,500, which I met 3 out of 5 days. For week 3, I set my goal at 9,000, which I met 2 out of 5 days. So week goal was not met and was kept for week 4, which in week 4, I met 1 out of 5 days. During these 2 weeks, there was an increase in meetings and a decrease in client attendance at work, accompanied by me being sick. So my activity level was drastically impacted by those 3 variables. So week 5, I kept my goal at 9,000 as I felt better and I was hoping that the clients would continue to show up or increase showing at work. During that week, I met 3 out of 5 days, or I'm sorry, 3 out of 4 days. The intervention ended on the 4th day of the week for me. If we continued the intervention or the study another week, I would have increased to 9,500, which was my total goal for this intervention. And per my continued increase in average daily steps, I believe I would have met this goal, as my end average was 8,595 in intervention. So I went from 6,427 steps per day in baseline to 8,595 steps in intervention. So thank you. Now Sarah will discuss her graph.
Thank you, Alicia. Let me pull my graph up. Okay. On my graph, you will see that my very first day of baseline, I had an extremely low number, and I was wearing one of the clip-on pedometers that was not accurately counting my steps, and it got knocked off of my clothes around lunchtime, and so it did not really count steps all afternoon. So the very next day, I swapped to a wrist band, and that monitored my daily steps, and it synced with my cell phone so that I could keep up with steps that way. After that, my steps were pretty regular, and it started to stabilize after a few days. I took baseline for 7 days. After that first day, it peaked the second day because of a field trip, and then it stabilized and was within 500 for 4 of the next 5 days. So after it stabilized a little bit, I started intervention on day 8. My overall goal for the whole intervention was 11,900 steps. For week 1, my goal was 11,000 steps, and I met that goal all 5 days. So I increased my steps to 11,600 steps on week 2 of intervention, and I met that goal 3 out of 5 days. So I moved on. I was able to increase my steps again on week 3 of intervention, and I set the goal for 11,800 steps. I met my goal that week on 3 out of 5 days, which allowed me to continue to week 4 intervention. For week 4 of intervention, I set my goal for 11,950 steps, which I met 3 out of 5 days, which ended up being higher than my original long-term goal by 50 steps. It got harder and harder to meet my goal as the intervention increased, and I feel like I had a stable baseline, or I had a stable number of steps here, and that if I would have continued to do the intervention, that I really would not have increased. I probably would have decreased. By the end, I was walking laps around the inside of my house trying to get my number of steps. You can tell 3 days in a row where my steps were drastically lower than other days, and those were days that I was in meetings with parents or PST meetings for more than 3 hours, which really made it hard to meet my goal when I was sitting in meetings for 3 hours. The next person we're going to go to is Robin.
All right. Okay, so, oh boy, there's my graph. There we go. Okay, so for me, baseline lasted 10 days due to the variability in my data. I believe that one of the variables that affected my baseline was the number of clients I had a day. During baseline, I had 4 clients for 8 hours a day at work, whereas during the intervention phase, I only had like 2 to 3 clients. So I only had clients for 4 to 6 hours of the day. Once I felt that I had a stable baseline, I did set my goal, my long-term goal for 14,000 steps. And my first week goal was actually set at 13,500. For week 1, I only met criteria 1 out of the 5 days. And so because my steps were so low that week, I decided to decrease my goal for week 2. So week 2, I set my goal at 13,000, but still struggled to meet the goal, but was able to at least meet criterion at 3 out of 5 days. So for week 3, I increased to 13,500 steps. And during that week, I started volleyball. So I had quite a few increases that week. I think one week I actually reached over 17,000 steps. And met criteria in week 3, 3 out of 5 days. And then the final week, I increased my goal to 13,750 and was able to meet criteria in 3 out of 5 days. So although I only met criteria in 3 out of the 4 weeks, I wasn't able to increase my average step count, but I do think that I was still successful through the intervention. I had quite a bit of variability in my graph, but I think overall, like, it was a pretty steady trend. And I think had the intervention continued for me, I hopefully would have gotten to my 14,000 step goal, but it definitely was difficult to get there. You know, if I went to work and had something in the evening, I was able to meet my goal, but it would definitely be something hard to keep up for a long time. So that is my data. And here's Amanda to wrap up the graphs.
Okay. You can see that. Okay. Bring it towards there. So for my data, I started with looking at the weeks of my baseline and looking at average per the week. And I took 10% of whatever was going on there and added that on top of it, and that was my criteria. So it was just raising it 10% each time. In the first 10 days is my baseline. Then I lost my pedometer somewhere between 10 and 13. So there's no data available. I had to get a new pedometer, which was a different make than the one before, which is probably somehow contributing to the differences in my steps, but hard to know. So then I started intervention immediately afterwards since I had hit baseline prior. The goals that I had set for myself per week, as I said, were 10% increases. So the first week was 4,068, which I hit. Then it was 4,474 for second week, which I hit again. 4,921 for third, no problem there. And of course, 5,413 was my last one with my ultimate goal of 6,000, which, as you can see from the graph, in general, I probably hit. There are a couple of dips, which due to the fact that my schedule changes with the kiddos, I probably didn't have someone that day, or I had a lot less that day. Maybe we had to shift people around. You also see an increase, which we had a couple of days where I was stuck with 3 or 4 kiddos instead of, say, 1 or 2, which is my usual. So I had a lot more movement going around. And if I'd been stuck with a kiddo that was, or if I'd been placed with a kiddo that was, say, more energetic than my usual, then of course I had to move around a lot more than prior. So that is going to increase or going to contribute to the increase in my steps there. Overall, it worked. I probably would end up going up to something like 6,000 would be my technically next goal if I were to do a 10%, somewhere around there. And I don't think it would be a problem hitting that sort of thing. Okay, so once I figure out how to do this. There we go. Okay, so for the discussion part of this, the first thing, and I think this is just the obvious fantastic move into from what I just talked about, pedometers, they were all different. So that's going to contribute to your differences in your data. Whether or not a pedometer, first of all, is accurate or valid, that isn't easy to answer because there's not a lot of data available already. And since they're all made differently, some are more sensitive, some are less sensitive, that's going to contribute to the changes in data. So some people are going to have better data, some people have worse data. It's hard to tell. And if in an optimal situation, you would want everyone to have the same pedometer. That way you can keep a tighter control on the steps and make sure that, within your capability, keep it as objective and concise as possible. The second part of that is the fact that we are at distances, so it's really hard to keep track of all the data and making sure that, the pedometers themselves are being accurate, or we're being accurate, or, whatever, right? So that is something to always keep in mind whenever you're doing a long distance or any sort of research that connects via digital media. There's always that possibility. We're human after all. Humans are terrible organisms. The other thing to keep in mind is the fact that we are all of varying ages and physical activity levels. So some are going to be more inclined to physical activity and some are less inclined. That's going to also change how things work, especially if we're looking at whether someone hit criteria or they didn't. Someone who's already excessively physically active, it's going to be really hard to hit a criteria that's even higher, because you do have that period, that point where organisms are going to hit that you just can't get any higher, due to things like, sleeping and just resting and that sort of thing, or maybe your job and that sort of thing like that. Whereas those of us who are in the lower criteria, we can usually pump it up a little bit more without too much difficulty. So it's going to be easier for us to hit it. So whether or not the intervention, you have to keep that in mind, because it may or may not be the intervention. If we're talking about people who generally are very physically active, they just might inherently walk more, just that's just what they do. Whereas those of us who don't walk quite as much, it might actually be beneficial. So there's that to keep in mind. And as I said, we're at different age categories and different physical activities. The ages is important just for the simple fact that age matters in physical capabilities, and so that could always affect your data. In future research, what would be really interesting to look at are the differences in sexes, just because you do tend to see females tend to take on a lot of caregiver roles, especially in the mental health setting. We might just inherently walk more, so you might see a discrepancy in males and females to increase their steps. You might see it's more difficult for women just because we inherently walk more, whereas men, it might be easier because they're men. Anyway, so the other thing is just the geographical locations. Since we did do this from morning to night, that is going to shift your time a little bit. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, but there is always that to consider. Let's see what we've got here. I think that's pretty much all we've got for that. The research is pretty good when it comes to the efficacy of these types of interventions, but it's still a bit sparse. So it's something that we could definitely do better. We could do more research on it, especially with pedometers, just making sure that the pedometers are accurate and are valid, so that if we are doing research with them, we're making sure that our data is as good as we can get it, instead of relying on, simple technology to tell us whether or not something's working. All right, there we go.
Thank you for watching our video. Although only 4 out of 5 of the participants were able to meet their long-term goal, our data does show that setting goals, self-monitoring, and feedback can increase physical activity through increasing daily step counts.